Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting. We have a fantastic speaker for us tonight, Tim, which I'll introduce in a minute. We're recording tonight. We're recording tonight's session, so this will be going onto YouTube at some point for those folks that couldn't make it. So if you don't want to be on the internet, then perhaps don't put your camera on or something. Let's leave it a couple of minutes just for anybody that's late to join. We've got 21 folks on altogether, which is a pretty good turnout. So thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight. We've got members of Sutton and Sheen, but we've also got some other folks as well. So welcome everybody. Everyone's welcome to our sessions. And I think hopefully everyone's nice and safe and well in the current uncertain times. And yeah, I think the net, is still going on the repeater every Monday night. So if you are not doing that, just a reminder, we do have a net on Monday nights on the GW4VXE repeater. So I'd encourage you to join that. Okay, so I'm going to welcome Tim. So Tim Kirby, GW4VXE, is our tonight's speaker. You may know Tim's name. Tim is a regular writer. In fact, he writes the column World of VHF or in Practical Wireless. So you may have seen Tim's writing there. And I know, Tim, you also do a lot of work also for Radcom and for Radio User, and probably the magazines I've not read as well. So I know you're very widely published. So I know you specialise very much in the kind of higher frequency stuff, so the VHF, UHF kind of activities. So that's great. If you've got any questions, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for Tim. If you've got any questions, as usual, if you put them in the chat window, and we'll bring you in at the end, and we can put them to Tim. So Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Very good evening to everyone. Lovely to be with you. I was saying to Chris, of course, we have a bit of a tech call to make sure that the connection works and everything. And I was saying that I have spoken with the Sutton and Sheen Club before, and I was trying to remember when it was and what it was about. And I think it was probably back in the early 2000s. I was lucky enough to be part of one of the FSDXA expeditions to the Comores D68C, and I have a feeling that I came to talk to you about that, but I can't actually remember. Anyway, this evening isn't going to be about an expedition. This evening is very much a sort of VHF, UHF focus. And I don't know if any of you saw, but I was lucky enough to be invited to present one of the RSGBs tonight at 8 webinars a few months back now, and that was very much an introduction to VHF. I called it My World of VHF. So what I've done this evening is that I've taken the next steps, if you like, into VHF, and hopefully come up with some things that might interest you, or things that you could think about trying. I've put a few slides together, so I hope you'll find those interesting. And you know, rather than trying to take any URLs or anything like that, there might be, more than happy to share the slides. So either I can share them with Chris at the end, or you can drop me an email. There's an email address at the end of the talk. Just drop me a line and I can send you a PDF of the slides or whatever. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try, I was going to say I'm going to try sharing my screen, but actually, Chris, it says that the host had disabled screen sharing, which...
1 second, Tim, let me fix that. Sorry, right, try again now if that's okay.
And all I have to do now is find the right one. There we go. Lovely job.
There we go.
So hopefully you can just give me a thumbs up if you can see a slide.
Yeah, we can see the slide, Tim.
Yay! Brilliant. So further adventures with your VHF UHF station. So what's it going to be about this evening? So what I'm going to try and persuade you is that though VHF, UHF is brilliant for local chats and local nets, and I understand you've got a net. It's really good for lots of other things. So so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the sorts of things that you can perhaps try and do to extend the range of your VHF, UHF station, or at least get a little bit more out of it. I think, you know, sometimes we have equipment at home, and we can actually do a little bit more with what we've already got. So hopefully convince you to have a go at that. And the other thing is, you know, definitely ignore all the people that say there's no activity on VHF. You know, we do get people writing into the mags every now and again and saying, well, I don't ever hear anything on VHF. And okay, yeah, maybe you don't, but perhaps you're not listening at the right times or in the right places, and so on and so forth. So please don't listen to them, and I'll try and convince you that there's actually rather more happening than you might first think. So we're going to start this evening. I'm just about scraping in with this slide. I think most people know perhaps that with 6 meters, there's a sporadic E season in the summer. The openings normally start somewhere in April, and they normally last into August, perhaps with the best months being perhaps May and June, and you know, it starts to tail off after that. But what a lot of people don't know or forget or whatever is that there's actually a little peak of sporadic E propagation in the winter. It normally starts perhaps just after Christmas, usually that sort of time, and sort of goes into the new year and just about making it around now. So, you know, keep listening over the next few days. It normally doesn't last beyond the end of January. So, so this is one to think about fairly quickly. But it can be quite interesting, and we'll talk about a real sort of surprising opening that occurred the other day that made me sort of rethink my ideas about winter E's. But in terms of knowing whether 6 meters is going to go is going to open up, 27 and 28 megs will perhaps give you a clue. A lot of people, you know, suck their teeth when I say 27 megs. Well, you know, the nice thing about 27 megs, if you like, is that there's loads of activity there. The CB guys are a lot better at using their spectrum, if you like, than us amateurs are of using 10 meters, perhaps. So if you listen on, say, the CEPT channels for FM or AM from Europe, or even 27555, the sideband frequency, which of course isn't legal in this country, then if you start hearing quite strong signals over a short distance, then that's a good indication that the MUF is rising, and it might well be worth having a look on 6 meters. There's some good websites as well that you can use to check things out. There's G7IZU's website that I've listed there. What he does is he takes data from the DX clusters and probably the PSK Reporter website as well. I think so. No, actually just the DX clusters, and plots it onto some nice maps, and he plots the endpoints of each path, so you can, as lots of lines start to cross, you can see where the center of that path is, and thus where the reflection points for sporadic E is actually happening. Jim, G3YLA, has also got a really nice website called PropQuest, www.propquest.co.uk, and Jim plots where potential sporadic E reflecting points are, and I'll show you an example of that in a few moments. Digital modes give you a really good advantage if you've only got a fairly small station. Then, you know, sure, if you're in the right place at the right time, CW and sideband will work absolutely fine. But you will get a lot more bang for your buck if you're going to use digital modes like FT8. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on in the talk. This is a little bit of a example that happened the other day. I think it was on the 13th of January, so last week. And this was the opening that I was referring to earlier, and said that it made me rethink my ideas about winterese, which I guess I'd always thought of being, you know, quite good for sort of one hop around Europe. So it was a nice reminder that 6 meters does open up from time to time, and you could you know, perhaps work some DLs or some OKs or some SMs, EAs, you know, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so it was last Wednesday. I had a message from my friend Richard, GW4VXE, who's about 15 miles away from me, and he said that 6 meters was opening up. And unfortunately for me, I actually take my 6 meter beam down in the winter here. We're about a mile away from the sea, from the Irish Sea, so the gales come in at quite a good speed here from time to time. So I take the 6 meter beam down, just have a 2 meter beam up, which seems to cope with the high wind speeds fairly well. But so I take the 6 meter beam down, but I discovered a couple of weeks ago, when I was just playing around with something, I thought, I wonder if the 20 meter vertical works on 6 meters, and sure enough, it worked quite well on receive. It even worked a little bit on transmit, and I found I could sort of make some fairly local QSOs. So hearing from Richard that 6 meters was open, I thought, well, that's interesting. Let me connect up the 20 meter vertical. I had a quick listen, and sure enough, there were some quite strong signals coming through, and managed to work a couple. So that was nice, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And I just kept sort of working on something I was doing in the shack. And to my surprise, I saw, I think it was Mark, EI3KD, who's just across the water from me in County Cork. And Mark started calling A65BR in the Middle East. Oh, wow, that's well, you know, what's going on there? And I'm pretty sure he worked him. And then I started to see somebody calling 9K2GS from Kuwait. I thought, well, this, you know, really isn't your typical 6 meter winter opening. And to my great surprise, a few minutes later, I heard 9K2GS from Kuwait. This is all on FT8, of course. But he came up to quite a decent signal on the 20 meter vertical. I'd love to report that I worked him, but I didn't. But I was happy enough to hear him. And I thought, well, you know, this is quite something of an opening. And I thought, well, that's pretty much, you know, that's going to be it. But a few minutes later, the opening sort of moved round to the west, and I was seeing people calling and working V1PZ and Whiskey 1 Lima in the northeastern part of the US. So, you know, really quite a spectacular opening. I asked Jim G3YLA what he thought about it. You know, was there something you know, unusual going on? Because I don't recall a multi-hop opening in the winter before. I might be wrong, but I don't recall that. And Jim's view was that there wasn't anything particularly strange about propagation, although it was certainly not common at this time of year. But there were multiple reflecting points, and you can see on Jim's map here the sort of yellow and red areas as sort of potential hotspots for reflecting of sporadic E signals. So yeah, that was a really interesting one. So do keep an eye on 6 meters. I should say, by the way, that although I've been talking about 6 meter for sporadic in the winter, it does also reach 4 meters. Slightly less often, of course, than it does at 6 meters, and it will sometimes reach 2 meters. It's pretty unusual, but I think it was last winter, just after we'd moved here, and I just had, I don't know if some of you have seen the inflatable aerials that you can get from air antennas up in Scotland, and I had one of Tom's inflatable 2 meter antennas out, because we just moved, hadn't got an aerial up, and just had the sort of coax dangling out the window and the this inflatable thing on a short pole outside, and I was looking at 2 meters to see if I could work anybody, and I was a little bit surprised to see a guy from Poland coming in. So that was 2 meters sporadic in December, which is pretty unusual, but interesting stuff. All right, so that's 6 meters. So what if you've got just FM equipment? Don't really mean to say just FM equipment, because you can have lots of fun on 2 meters and 70 SEMS FM. But you've got FM equipment. You'd like to find out a little bit more about VHF and UHF propagation. Well, there's lots you can do. If you've got a VHF FM rig, perhaps 2 and 70 or just 2 meters, and a vertical antenna, hopefully outside, but you can perhaps use one in the loft. There's lots of interesting things you can do, and what I'd suggest you do is to program all the repeater and simplex channels that you can into your rig. And I will say that the most interesting ones are the ones that are normally quiet. So program those all into your rig, and then when you're in the shack, put the rig on scan. And of course, because you're over towards the east of the country, it's probably not unusual for there to be propagation into the continent. So I think 2 meter repeater channels, by and large, the same, although I think the French have some slightly different repeater channels to us. But if you get on to 70 SEMS, then of course Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and so on, they all have quite different repeater schemas. So have a look at some of those, and program some of those in as well. And anyway, when you're in the shack, put the rig on scan, and as I say, prepare to be surprised. And it's fascinating to see what comes up for a few seconds here or there, on sometimes a few minutes, and that starts to give you an idea of when the band's open. Well, of course, when you talk about 2 meter and 70 SEMS openings, then a lot of us think about the lovely long openings that perhaps occur with a prolonged area of high pressure in the summer or in the autumn. That it seems to go on for weeks on end. But actually, there's a lot of much shorter openings that perhaps are weather related in some way, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But those openings can perhaps last from a few minutes to half an hour or an hour, something like that. And it's those can be fascinating. And an example of those, one of those, is when I was living back in Oxfordshire. I did exactly this. I programmed up all the 2 meter repeater channels in one of the rigs, and had it on scan. And I was up in the shack and just listening, and it stopped on this one channel. And I won't claim to be a linguistic expert in any sense. But particularly as I know there are some people watching that are much better at languages than I am. But anyway, that's by the by. And I was listening to, it stopped on this one channel, and I thought, I have no idea what language that is. And Anyway, I stopped to listen, and I thought, well, perhaps I'll get some sort of clue in a moment. But I didn't, and I was very thankful. After about 15 minutes or so, there was a CWID, and it was actually a repeater up in Norway, on the south coast of Norway. And I thought, well, that's pretty spectacular. I think that was about 600 miles or 1,000 k from where I was. So that's quite interesting on FM. And so of course I went down onto SSB at the time. Oh, I forgot to close my messages application, didn't I? Let's just do that before it all goes horribly wrong. Right, sorry about that. Yeah, I went down onto to SSB and tried a CQ call, and nothing came back, and tried CW, nothing came back. Went back onto FM, and they were still there, which you know, I think that there's not huge amounts of activity on CW and sideband from Norway. There's perhaps a little bit more on FT8 these days, but that was before the digital times, I think. And so, of course, it was fascinating to listen to. The opening went on for about 25-30 minutes, and then just faded into the noise. And I suppose, you know, perhaps the repeater was on a mountain or a hill. And we just had some sort of high-level duct going on. So it can be quite interesting. I've certainly also worked when I was in Oxfordshire, worked into a 2-meter repeater up on the Alps within spitting distance of Marseille, which was lovely. I had some lovely QSOs, and you know, people say, oh well, you know, it's not DX if you're working through a repeater, and yeah, that's fine. But actually, my 2-meter signal was going all the way to the Alps or to Norway or whatever. So you know, that's not bad DX for VHF FM, I think. So, what else can you do with the simple station? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about 2-meter and 70 SEMS FT8. If you're not a fan of FT8, then please humour me, because there are some possibilities that I don't think you would be able to do another way, and you know, perhaps you might find that interesting. If you decide you don't, then of course that's absolutely fine. But I do think it's certainly changed. I think I've probably learned more in the last 2 or 3 years about VHF and UHF propagation than perhaps in the previous 35 or whatever. So what do you need? Well, if you've got a 2-meter 70 SEMS CW and sideband rig, an interface that'll sit between a computer and your rig. I've said a 50-watt rig there, but you know, a lot of people use less power than that, and of course that works absolutely fine. But you will do better with slightly higher power, of course. Traditional wisdom for working VHF, UHF, DX, of course, is to use a horizontal antenna, and I'm certainly not going to advise you to do anything different. But if you don't happen to have one of those, or you haven't got room to put one of those up, have you got a vertical antenna? Well, if you have, why not try that? And you'll be surprised at what's possible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And of course, if you enjoy finding out about propagation, then FT8 is superb for that sort of thing, because of the PSK reporter website. Because if somebody hears your signal and they're monitoring and they're uploading their spots to PSK reporter, you can see where your CQ or your contacts were heard. And So even if you put a CQ out and you're not called by anybody, you start to get an idea of what the propagation is like on any one particular day. So that can be very interesting indeed. So what can you do with a simple station? Well, tropo openings, so both the long and short openings, the long openings, the protracted openings over several days that we talked about, or the short openings, like I was explaining about the short opening up to Norway just now. That those will work, of course. Aircraft scatter. Aircraft scatter is a huge thing, particularly if you've got a vertical antenna, where you've got plenty of radiation going straight up, which will perhaps hit an aircraft and be reflected back to ground. You may find that you can make some surprising contacts on aircraft scatter on both 2 meters and 70 sems, which extend your range considerably. So that's good fun, and we'll talk some more about that in a moment. Sporadic E, well, of course, I used to think 2 meter sporadic E is fairly rare, as many of you know. Traditionally, it happens in June or July, but can occur outside of those times. And I was thinking, well, it's not much good me even if I hear an opening, or a sporadic E opening, and I've got my little station, there's no point in calling anybody on sporadic E. They'll never hear me. And of course, I should have thought about that, because if any of you have been around for a 2 meter sporadic E opening, what you probably know is that if you're in the right place, it doesn't matter what aerial you've got. If you've got a handheld or something like that, if you're in the right place and the signals are landing where you are, you will work that station, whatever aerial you are. If you're on the fringe of it, of course, it's potentially a little bit more difficult. So sporadic E, that's very possible. And meteor scatter, well, even if you've got a vertical antenna up, you will notice from time to time you'll hear perhaps see one or two periods from a station, perhaps 1,000 miles away. Will be decoded on your screen. I wouldn't say it's a way of making meteor scatter contacts, but I think you'd be pushing your luck to do that on a vertical, although it might be possible in one of the major showers. But I did notice, I was monitoring today, there's some meteor bursts coming through. So anyway, so yeah, you will see potentially some meteor scatter reflections. And if you've got a simple station, well, you probably, it's a bit like QRP, isn't it? You probably need to listen more than you transmit, and do be patient. Particularly if you've got trying to make a contact via aircraft scatter, you may find that the aircraft is not in the right place between you and the station that you're wanting to work for very long. So you might find that you can exchange call signs and perhaps a report, but you're waiting for the Roger report or the 73 or whatever. So stick with it. On HF, I think if people haven't made a contact within a couple of minutes, they give up and go and do something else. On VHF, UHF, I'd encourage you to stick with it. Some contacts might take 50 minutes or so before either another aircraft comes along or perhaps Tropo picks up again. So stick with it, and then hopefully you'll be able to complete. I had a lovely example the other day of I was trying to work Derek, GATCI, who's up in Lincolnshire on 2 meters. Derek's got a difficult direction over towards South Wales with the Lincolnshire Wolds not far from him, and I've of course got the Cambrian Mountains and goodness knows what in his direction. So we were reliant on aircraft scatter, and it took about 15 minutes to complete the QSO, but that went okay. So yeah, if you've I sort of wanted to share with you, you know, what I managed to do with a very simple station on 2 meters FT8, and I kind of got into it. I saw a tweet from Jason GW4VXE, who's in Bristol. He was on Twitter, and this was probably almost 3 years ago now, and he was saying that he was listening on 2 meters FT8, and at that time FT8 was unusual on VHF UHF. It was it become reasonably common on HF. And I thought, well, that'd be interesting on 2 meters. I wonder if I can work something. The problem was that my beam had stopped working a few months ago, and it was a right pain where we were before to get the 2 meter beam down. You know, it involved ladders and hanging off the side of the house and things like that, none of which I was terribly keen on. So my beam was broken, but I did have a vertical antenna, and I thought, well, I wonder what happens if I have a listen on 2 meters FT8. And I suppose I should explain that where we were before, it was quite a decent location, about 100 meters above sea level, with not too much around us. So although not hugely high, there wasn't a lot in the way. So I thought, well, I'll put a CQ call out and see what happens. And I think I managed my very first QSO on 2 meters FT8 was Martin G0GMB, who does such a good job over at the NRC at Bletchley Park. But one of the most interesting QSOs in the early days was I called CQ one evening, and I was very surprised to be called by Richard GW1JFE, who, as I mentioned earlier, is just down the road from me. And I was really surprised by that, because I knew that Richard was also using a vertical antenna, and I think an FT897 at around 50 watts or whatever. Now, okay, we can talk about VHF, UHF propagation, and it's not a huge deal to work from the centre of the country to West Wales if you've got horizontal beams pointing at each other. We do that reasonably frequently, I guess. But to do it on a night in, I think it was January or February, it was around this time of year when conditions were pretty horrible, vertical to vertical. Now that really caught my interest, and what we discovered over the next couple of years was that we could pretty much work at any time of day or night. And in fact, it was almost more interesting when we couldn't work each other, because you think, well, what's happened to propagation, or has my aerial fallen off, or whatever. So and in fact, we did discover that there was a certain weather pattern. If there was some rain over the western edge of some of the Welsh mountains, the Black Mountains, then that seemed to cause some dispersion to the signals. And although we could potentially see each other's signals on the FT8 waterfall, we couldn't get a decode. So that was always quite fun. And of course, we did also have some periods of extended good propagation, and Richard would be a huge signal with me, and likewise. And one day, I think he was about +5, which, as I'm sure, is a pretty decent report on FT8. Good strong signals, probably showing up nice and red on the waterfall. And I said to Richard, well, why don't we, great signals today, why don't we try and have an SSB QSO? Let's see how that works out, because people are always saying that CW and SSB, they're almost as good as FT8. Well, let's give it a go and see what happens. So we went on to SSB, and bear in mind this is in a period of really good propagation. rock crushing signal on FT8. We could hear each other on SSB at sort of 4-on-1 type level. We certainly wouldn't have wanted to have an extended QSO, but we could hear each other, which I was pretty proud of actually, to make a sort of 250k QSO on 2 meters sideband with a vertical. I thought that was quite interesting. So yeah, over 2 years on FT8, I had lots of interesting QSOs. It was about 2,000 QSOs in total, with over 500 different stations. I don't think there were any at that time. I don't think there were any FT8 type contests, so I didn't do those. So they were sort of random type QSOs. My best DX was a Greek station. I was really pleased with that. It was sporadic. It was one morning in July, and actually I didn't react as quickly as I might have done, because I'd kind of forgotten what band I was on, and I sort of thought I was on 6 meters, and you know, SV's good on 6 meters anyway, so I'd normally call an SV, but I was probably doing something else, and I'll call him in a moment. And then I thought, oh wow, I'm actually on 2 meters. I called him, and I was really pleased to have a QSO with him. And that was the first Greek station that I'd ever worked on 2 meters. Hadn't worked it using a beam and amp or anything like that. So so that was lovely. And I'll show you a little bit more about the coverage I was able to get with the simple station in a second. But you know, the transient openings are very interesting as well. I would notice when a weather front was coming in from the Atlantic, I'd very often see F6APE, who's down in the western part of France. I think he's IN 97 or somewhere like that. He would suddenly peak up for a few moments, and I'd be able to work him on the vertical. And that was always fascinating, and sometimes the case with stations up north as well. As a weather front would come in, I would get a quick north-south opening and be able to make some interesting QSOs. That gives you an idea of some of the squares I was able to work using this extremely basic system. That's the sort of central part of the map. It did go out further to the east and to the south with sporadic E. So that was really interesting. I was always quite pleased with. I think it was this one down in the southwestern corner there. That was Euro UT1FG Maritime Mobile on a ship. I think he was going across to South America at the time. So lots of interesting QSOs. So it's surprising what is possible with quite a simple system. So you know, some final thoughts on simple VHF, UHF, FT8. It does work better if you're in the centre of activity. You know, where I am out here on the west coast of Wales, I do sometimes use a vertical antenna, and it gives me as you might imagine, a good all-round ear on what's going on. But it's quite interesting for aircraft scatter as well. So you know, even from somewhere quite remote like here, it does work okay. But you know, I certainly do rely on my beam, which is back up and working very well from here. But you're in, you know, where you are, you're close to the centre of activity. You've got lots of aircraft above you at all sorts of different heights, which will support all sorts of different lengths of QSO. Sorry, a different distance of QSO. So that you know, that's a very positive thing. By the way, if you're interested in the whole aircraft scatter thing, then there's some really neat software that you can download. It's free. It's called AirScout. If you go to airscout.eu, what it does is you say where your location is. You give the location of the station that you're trying to work. Might be a beacon you're trying to listen to or something like that. You put those in. You say what frequency you're on. Is it 2 meters? Is it 70 sems? Is it 23 sems? And it plots that path, and it takes the data from Flight Radar 24, and what it looks at, it looks at the planes that are flying around, and looks at, as the planes come into the appropriate point on the path that between you and the distant station. It actually shows you that the path is sort of opening up, and that you'll probably hear a reflected signal at that point. It's really fascinating. If you haven't tried it, really recommend it. You can use it with perhaps a 2 meter beacon in Scotland or Cornwall or the Netherlands. You might find that very interesting. Don't need a beam. You can use a vertical for that, and it still work quite well. Anyway, I digress slightly from the slide, but that's okay. I'm certainly not saying, throw away your VHF, UHF beams. That's not the case. But what I am saying is, do try and use the aerial that you have. And if you've got a vertical aerial, then you'll probably be able to do more with it than perhaps you might have thought. Don't be put off by the people that tell you it won't work, and just ignore them. It works really well. Do be a good neighbour. If you see one of your locals trying to work a weak station on 2 meters FT8, is probably not terribly sociable to transmit in the period where he's listening. So do try and operate on the same period if you can. Of course, it's not always possible. The reason I mention that is that you'll sometimes hear people say, oh, transmit on the first period if you're beaming north or beaming east, and that's kind of fine. But what do you do if you've got a vertical? So just try and be a good neighbour, I think is the way I put it. There's 2 meter FT8. Of course, there's 70 sems FT8 is gaining in popularity as well. I do find it's harder work, but you can also make some QSOs with either small beams or vertical antennas. It does seem to be substantially harder work than 2 meters, but there's some in tropo openings. There is really quite a substantial amount of activity on 432174 now. So do have a listen there, and it's not just tropo openings. There's I think every month there's a European FT8 VHF and UHF activity period. It's something like the second Wednesday of the month, or for 70 sems, I think. It's probably the first Wednesday for 2 meters. And there's, where you are, there's really good activity on 70 sems FT8. So do have a listen there. People are trying FT8 on 23 sems as well. Might be pushing your luck a little bit on 23 because of greater dispersion on signals. You might find that you can potentially see signals, but they may not decode quite as often. But it's still worth a go. And I'm certainly seeing people saying that they are having successful QSOs on 23. On FT8, and of course with rigs like the FT9700 with 23 built in, means it's possible for a lot more people to try. So yeah, do give that a go. It's really interesting. As I say, I think I probably learned more in two or 3 years about VHF, UHF propagation than I did in the previous 35, and I've been reasonably active on VHF, UHF. So you know, what else can you have a go at? Well, there's the ISS crossband repeater, which you might be interested to have a listen for. Pretty sure it's on at the moment. I did see this morning a tweet that made me think they might be the station on the ISS. They tend to alternate between running APRS on 145825. It's a digipeater, and the crossband repeater, which I've talked about here. So I think it's currently in crossband repeater mode, but you may find that it switches shortly to APRS. But you know, within a month or so, it'll come back on as a crossband repeater. So it's worth having the details. The downlink is on 70 SEMS. The nominal frequency is 437.8. Because of the Doppler shift, as the ISS approaches, always from the west, as I'm sure you know, it will appear on your radio about 10 kcs high at 437.81. By the time it comes overhead, it will be on its nominal frequency of 437.800, and by the time it goes out to the east, it'll be down on 437.790. You'll be able to hear it, you know, if you're outside with a handheld and a rubber duck, you should be able to hear it just fine. If you've got a white stick vertical, you'll almost certainly be able to hear it just fine when the ISS is probably about 10 degrees above the horizon or less. As it goes higher in the sky, you'll find that you don't hear it as consistently as it moves through the radiation pattern of your antenna, but you will hear it from time to time. The uplink for the crossband repeater, by the way, is on 2 meters, 145.990, and you'll need a 67 hertz CTCSS tone to get through. It is very busy. It's in lots of ways not perhaps a brilliant advert for amateur radio, but it is quite interesting to listen to and see who's coming through. And certainly from here, I find if I can catch the westerly passes, you know, low out over the sea, it doesn't get too busy, and I can get through reasonably easily, and perhaps work down into Spain or the Canaries, which is always quite pleasant to do. So yeah, a little bit about the ISS crossband repeater. So almost wrapping up then, but I hope. You know, what I've tried to do is cover some things that you could think about trying on VHF, UHF. It is superb, of course, for local chats and local nets. But even if you've got a very simple station, I hope I've given you some ideas of things that you can perhaps try. And you know, I get that not everybody likes FT8 and so on, but they do give a simple station a huge advantage. So you ignore them at your peril. You don't have to operate exclusively digital modes. I did find, going back a few months, I love operating 2 meter and 6 meter FT8, which is, you know, predominantly what I do on those bands. But I you know, back in the summer, I thought, you know, it actually would be quite nice to you know, have some real QSOs with people, and thoroughly enjoyed you know, putting an HF dipole up and making some CW QSOs as well. So you know, it's quite nice to do that stuff as well. So I think you know, that's that's the wonderful thing about our hobby, isn't it? There are so many different things that you can do. And I suppose the other thing that my friends at the retailers won't like me saying, but it's always great to have, you know, the latest and greatest rig, but you don't actually need lots and lots of fancy equipment to make some really interesting QSOs. You can actually use some fairly simple equipment to do that. So, you know, hopefully with the sort of gear that perhaps you have already. So there we are. That was what I wanted to say this evening. I hope it's been of some interest to you. I look forward to seeing you on the air on some mode or another. That's a nice sunset view out of the shack window. I'm very lucky to have sunsets out over the sea. If you have any questions, you're very welcome, of course, to we'll try and do some questions in a second. If you don't want to ask questions now, feel free to email me, or you can find me on Twitter. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it's been interesting, and very happy to try and answer any questions that you may have.
So Tim, thank you very, very much. That was really, really, really good. Lots of inspiration there, lots of things people perhaps haven't thought about trying out with their station, things you can try that you might not have thought of. So we've got a couple of things in the chat. Ed, do you want to come in with your French repeater? You mentioned about one you may be able to work from where you are.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm just using the microphone on my laptop, so I hope the audio is okay. Are you hearing me okay, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely fine, Edmund. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Tim, how nice to hear the talk this evening. And I'm also a VHF enthusiast, although I suppose you could sum it up by saying QRP, FM and vertical. I tend to be up the top end of the band rather than the bottom. But yes, Tim mentioned about French repeaters being on funny frequencies. The big one is just outside Caen in Lower Normandy, Calvados, that part of France. And the output is on 145.325, which is completely outside of where you would normally expect to find such things. But it's on top of a extremely tall hill, as I understand it. And I've worked stations in England, Wales, the Channel Islands, the Irish Republic and Spain. When there are good tropospheric conditions, the coverage of that thing can be absolutely enormous. So that's all I know, really. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Edmonds. And Richard, you had a comment about 23 SEMS, I think. I don't know if you want to unmute. There you are.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Well, being one of these people that ended up with a 9700 as a birthday present last year, but no aerial. So Tim, I don't know how brave your wife is. I managed to get mine to be brave, and two of us went up with ladders and put up a white stick, diamond white stick vertical at the side of the house. I've been told since then that no way is she going back up on a ladder beside me, but we've got the white stick vertical and have been playing around even higher up on 23 centimeters, doing things, dopey things like RTTY without computers. And I've ended up playing around with one of the old Tonneau terminals. So it's AFSK and FSK at 23 centimeters on RTTY. And there's about 4 of us here in sort of Bromley, Petswood, Orpington area. We're all sort of dopey enough to play around with silly things like this. And it's actually not been bad, considering we're only popping a couple of watts each into the aerial. We've been as far north as G4CLA, and of course regularly with Roger up at Tring, G3MEH. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Richard. Go on, Tim.
Can I jump in? Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Richard. Thank you. And I think I 23 is fascinating, and those verticals, I've heard they work quite well. I'm sure you could try and work some FT8 on there as well. But I've also heard some interesting stuff about 23 SEMS FM. Apparently, it's a huge thing in Japan. That they have, you know, whereas, you know, we have a lot of urban repeaters, shall we say, on 70 SEMS, they tend to do the same, but on 23. And it apparently works, you know, remarkably well, because of course it bounces off any building or structure or whatever that you've got, and can be really interesting. So I think it's really exciting that you're starting to play on 23 in that sort of way, and it'd be great if that sort of gets a bit of critical mass, and you know, we see what's possible, because I think there's an awful lot we don't know about 23.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tim, actually, because I know a lot of the newer rigs, you know, particularly obviously the Icons and the later Yaesus have now got things like 4 meters and 23 SEMS. I was wondering if you see more activity, perhaps because of the rigs are out there, that perhaps people are getting rigs that have that facility, and then I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll try that out. Are you finding that's the case?
I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure that does, you know, I think with things like 4 meters, we've seen that has got an awful lot more popular as the commercial rigs have become much more widely available. And of course, you know, lots more people have got the bands as well. But I think, you know, 23, the fact that you don't have to, transverters are great, but I don't know about you, it's always a faff, isn't it? And somehow any band that I've got a transverter for, I never quite operate as much as I probably sort of want to. So it's kind of easier just to hit the band switch. So yeah, I think it makes a huge difference with the rigs coming out with 23 on them.
Cool. Anybody else got any other questions or comments or want to share your experiences before we wrap things up?
Golf 6 Juliet X-ray Alpha.
Yeah, hi there, Kim. Do you want to come in?
Stand by a minute.
Okay. I think Kim's just having a... There we go.
Right. Apologies for the voice readout. Those that know me know reasons why. Yes, I came home many years ago after a Boys Brigade meeting, I think it was. It must have been the mid-80s. And Mum said to me, "Oh, supper in half an hour." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll go upstairs and get changed." I thought, well, okay. I got changed. I put the radio on and I tuned 70 centimeters, and it was as dead as a dodo. This is SSB. Not, in those days, there wasn't that much activity apart from the local repeater on FM. And I thought, okay. And I'm tuning around SSB, and there's this station coming up saying, "Hello test, 1 2 3 4 5, hello test." And I thought, he sounds like he's working Vox. So I thought, okay, you know, so it's he's not actually using the PTT, he's relying on his voice to trip the transmitter, for those who don't know Vox. So I thought, well, okay, if I time it right, I might be able to jump in the break. So I called him. I said, QRZ, gave him a call sign, and I'm thinking it's a local, like sort of 20, you know, within 10, 15, 20 miles away. No, Oscar November. I thought, what? And it's me running 10 watts to a 6-element Yagi in the loft, beaming over towards the east. And I sat there chatting to him like a local, no problem at all. No break from anybody else. I thought, okay, fine. I thought, crikey, don't tell me nobody else is hearing him. And it turns out he was testing a linear of some sort, but the band was wide open. There was nobody else calling. I thought, this is silly. So anyway, Mum called me for my supper, I said, well, I must go. I've just got the call for supper. And I signed with him. And I went, he went from chat mode into working one station every sort of 30 seconds. And he was still going half an hour later. You just don't know what you're going to find.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's brilliant, lovely story, Kim, and I think you do get that sometimes as well, and sometimes the spotlight is just on you. The propagation can be very focused, and you sometimes think, well, why isn't somebody else hearing this? Because they're a huge signal, and sometimes just the weather moves a little bit or something like that, and it widens. And somebody, as you say, sometimes people just aren't listening there. So yeah, it's lovely when that happens, isn't it? Magic. Well done.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, anybody got anything else just before we wrap up?
I've got a couple of things in mind, Chris, but I don't want to hog the limelight. So,
well, nobody else is putting their hand up at the moment, Edmund. So you may as well.
Okay, I'll leave a pause and wait for the K. Is there anybody else who wants to go first? I can't believe I'm the only person who's thought of a few questions. Okay, Tim, your new location there in Wales, which I know isn't that new anymore, is it? You've been there just over a year, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We moved in last December.
From things I've seen or read, I'm under the impression that you are in quite a favourable location for VHF. So my rather cheeky question is, was the place you moved to a happy accident, to quote a phrase that appeared on one of your slides, which I think might be a Bob Ross quotation, or was a good location for VHF one of the most important things you considered when deciding where to live?
I will answer the question seriously. It was when we were thinking about where we wanted to move to. We wrote down what we wanted. We wanted to be able to grow our own vegetables. We wanted perhaps space to put up a polytunnel. We wanted somewhere that was out in the country. We wanted somewhere that was quite peaceful. We wanted somewhere that was safe for cats. Oh, and we wanted somewhere with far-reaching views. Now that's absolutely true. I've always kind of dreamed of living somewhere where we have far-reaching views. Well, very happily that translates into a good takeoff. In some directions, it's we're about a mile from the coast, so I have an extremely good takeoff across the sea from south sort of round to north. It's a little bit more iffy back to the east, but it's not bad. So yeah, it's a very decent location. I have been lucky enough to work down into. I hoped that it would be possible to work the wonderful VHF UHF path to the southwest, down to the Canaries and to Cape Verde from here. I wasn't sure, but it proved that it was possible, and I was very excited the first time that 2 meters open down to Cape Verde. I think I didn't have a 2 meter beam up at the time, so we were out for a walk, and I had a message from a friend of mine. He said, "Oh, D4VXE is on 2 meters." So I came home and took the 6 meter beam down through a 2 meter beam on the mast and pointed it down there, and was absolutely delighted to work them. That was fabulous. But what was even more interesting was that I thought, well, fine, done that now, so I'll get back on 6 meters. So just swapped the aerials around and left the 2 meter vertical monitoring as I was putting the 6-meter beam back up. And when I got back into the shack, I discovered that I could still hear D4 VHF on the 2-meter vertical. So I thought, okay, well, we'll give them a call, and was able to work them with the vertical. I've heard them on 70 SEMS on the vertical as well. Unfortunately, we had this was back in the summer when it was possible to have guests, and we had a guest that evening, so I didn't make a QSO on 70 SEMS to Cape Verde, but that's something to aim for this year. So yeah, it was one factor, but it wasn't the only one.
Good answer. And my second and final question, and I promise that I will will go QRT after this. You mentioned CW and 2 meters, albeit in the context of using your CW skills to identify the repeater that you were hearing as being located in Norway. Have you had any contacts on 2 meters CW, and if you have, do you have any words of wisdom or tips on that subject, and specifically what frequency have you used? My motive for asking that is that if you look at the band plan, the centre of activity should be on 144.050, but all of the contacts I've had using CW on that band have all been up towards 144.3, which theoretically is the SSB centre of activity. So may I have your thoughts and any words of wisdom on that topic, please?
Ed, I don't know about wisdom at all. Yes, I have had some CW contacts on 2 meters, but not very many, and I think they were in a 2 meter CW contest, because I thought, well, I do like CW. And I thought, oh, well, I should go on and see if I can work somebody. So it's perhaps not a very typical example. So I think those particular QSOs were down towards the bottom of the band. Going back years, CW was a very, very valuable tool. I found, if you were hearing a weak station on 2 meters SSB. I grew up in Cheltenham in Gloucestershire, which is right behind the Cotswolds, so it's a really poor location to try and work into the continent. So I got to know that there were various people. I was never going to be very strong with a lot of these stations, even with a semi-decent system. So I started to realise that if there were I might hear particular stations, and I would call them on CW and they would be on SSB, that they would probably hear me, and that got me lots of nice VHF contacts over the years. I think that's probably less likely to be successful now, unless you know that somebody is a CW operator. But I wouldn't rule it out. If you in the unlikely event that you hear me on 2 meter SSB, you're always very welcome to call on CW, and I'll pick you out. But yeah, I think there are perhaps some activity periods that are promoted when you might hear signals on 144.050. But I think more of the time I would do as you say, Ed. I would be around the centre of activity 144.300, and if you're lucky enough to annoy somebody, then maybe you'll get a contact with them. So yeah, I would stick around 300, where you're more likely to be heard, unless it's a really big opening, when perhaps it might be worth trying 144.050. Certainly, if the band's open into Germany or the Netherlands, that sort of area, I would say it's probably worth a go on 050. But you're probably going to have more luck, just off 300, tune down 5 or 10 KCs and try a call on CW there. Does that help at all?
I've made a career out of annoying people, Tim. Thank you very much. It's been a great talk, and thank you to everybody else on the call for letting me monopolise the question and answer session at the end, a happy new year to you all. Stay safe. And I really, really, really am going to shut up now and hand it back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Edmund.
Jackson.
Yeah, Kim, you got something else?
Yes, comment on that that last comment. Unless they've changed it, and I will say I've been guilty because I'm not, I haven't downloaded the latest band plan yet. But I think you'll find that the it's CW up to 1444150, and then CW and SSB up to about 144.4. But I stand corrected.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. Sorry, I thought you were going to say CW. Some people say, oh, CW stops at 1440150, and no, it doesn't. So yeah, so you're good to transmit wherever you like in the narrow band portion of 2 meters on CW. So it's perfectly legit from a band planning point of view on 144-300. I think the question is more, will you get some contacts there? Will you get more contacts there than if you call them 1444050? So I think that's kind of the interesting issue, rather than the sort of band plan point. So, but yeah, thanks, Kim. It's well worth making that point that it's good to transmit up to as you say 144.4 on either CW or sideband. So thank you for making that point.
Thank you, Kim. Anybody else got any? Oh, go on, Kim. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And my best DX from here is Isle of Man on 2 meters. But never got it confirmed. But I have done County Waterford on 2 meters as well, and tore myself to pieces trying to work a Jersey station who was doing 1 English contact and 1 French contact, and then somebody on 70 SEMS, and then one of the contacts wanted to go to 2 meters, and could I hear him on 2 meters? No. It was just the way the conditions were. It was fine into Jersey on 70 SEMS, but not a sausage from the Jersey station on 2 meters, and that's with 2 quads, JB and Q4 on 2, and a whole bar, which is a kit of parts for a 6 element quad in 70 SEMS in my loft. And I'm only running 10 watts of SSB from a TR9000 at the time. So there we are. Right, that's enough from me. I'll mute and hand it back.
Thank you, Kim.
No. Do you mind me jumping in one more time?
No, absolutely, Tim. You're our speaker.
Well, I don't want to overstay my welcome, but no, I think you raised a couple of really interesting points there, Kim, and one was that sometimes you will hear a path open on 70 SEMS that won't be open on 2 meters. I remember when I lived back in Cheltenham back in the 1980s. As I say, it was a really lousy place for a VHF UHF enthusiast, and I remember being really excited to hear a Swiss station up on a mountain in Switzerland, and I was able to work him with my FT790 and microwave modules amplifiers, 30-watt amp, and a 21-element Yagi. So that was my 70 SEM station at the time. But the band wasn't open on 2 meters, and I found that really interesting. And of course, what you know how ducting works on tropo. Well, of course, a tropo duct doesn't need to be as large to support a 70 SEMS QSO as it does for a 2 meter band contact. So you know, sometimes you will find that the higher frequencies open first, and I don't have enough experience with 23, but Richard may be able to help there. That I suspect that on some paths that 23 might open before 70, before 2. So yeah, you can get some really interesting effects. I also liked the fact, Kim, you said I think you said you were using a Trio TR9000. I came across one of those the other day. Somebody gave me one from a 1980s abandoned shack, and it's a lovely rig. I've really enjoyed putting it back on the air. So yeah, thanks for making some interesting points there.
And Chris, if there's nobody else, I'll have another quick comment, but
okay.
Put it round to Dallas first and call me back in. If
okay, so before we bring Kim back in, has anybody else got anything else? Or looks, yeah, has anybody else got any? It looks like Richard. Was there anything in the chat from you, or are you just a comment about the rig? No. Okay. Okay, anybody else then before we bring Kim back in again? I'm looking around. Okay, there's nobody else, Kim. So if you want to carry on, you can if you want.
Right. When you're talking about ducting, that reminds me. For those who know me, I used to work at a well-known departmental store, now defunct, in this. In St. Nicholas, and on my lunch breaks I used to disappear into, how can I put this, the staff facilities room. And in there, if you stood in the within about a yard of the air conditioning duct on 70 cents, you could work all around London, no problem at all, with an a VX5 I had at the time. But because it was one of these modern buildings with air conditioning and everything else, anywhere away from the air conditioning duct, it was useless, because it was literally like a Faraday cage. But get within 1 yard of the air conditioning duct, and you could go all around London, no problem at all. All over, all the repeaters and everything. I used to spend about half an hour in there on a lunch break, literally working around and keeping an ear on the time and the PA, just in case anybody shouted for me. So it's quite interesting. Unfortunately, my manager, the manager I wanted to talk to, left, because I wanted to have a word with him to find out how wide these air conditioning ducts were. But I suspected something useful, somewhere around about 70 cents or something like that. They literally work like waveguides. Right, back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Kim. Okay,
that's a great story, isn't it? 70-cent waveguide. I wish I'd been around London to work you.
I assume the signal was bouncing around the duct and popping out of the building somewhere, and you're able to get out that way. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, before we wrap things up, then, anybody else got any final questions or comments or points or anything before we wrap things up with Tim? Okay, well, in that case, Tim, I'd like to thank you really very, very much. That was a fascinating talk, and lots of inspiration and ideas there for folks that people might not have thought about, perhaps to use perhaps with their equipment. So thank you very much for the talk. That was really fascinating, and we'll give you a virtual clap.
Thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for all the questions.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you guys for joining. We had a nice turnout tonight, so that's really good. So thank you very much, and we'll do it again next month. But that's it for tonight. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers, guys. I'll close things up now. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Cheers, Jags.